Gene Roddenberry once said, "It isn't all over, everything has not been invented, the human adventure is just beginning." This is the Producer's Lounge podcast, the best podcast online for tips and tricks on producing great film, television, and web content. Welcome back for Season 3, Episode 5, hosted and produced by greaterandgrander.com. On this week's episode, we're chatting with Trevor Roth, who has produced commercials and managed the brand for the Star Trek franchise and Gene Roddenberry estate. His credits include Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, and Star Trek Lower Decks. We discuss the emotional power of brands, the ways they can inspirationally affect us, and the dangers of adhering too exclusively to brands or big intellectual property, also known as IP. Trevor started out in the ad industry during the dot-com boom and bust, and then pioneered viewer-centric brand content with Roddenberry Entertainment. Here now is my conversation with Trevor Roth.
All right. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
They were like, yeah, a restaurant or, a bar or coffee. And I'm like, sounds loud, but okay.
So yeah. So
What caused you to start the podcast?
Honestly, I was really frustrated because when I went to film school, there was a ton of stuff out there for writers and directors, and then even after I joined the Producers Guild, there wasn't a lot of content that focused on the craft of producing, working with development, working with stuff from the management side. And I wanted there to be something out there for that type of audience, so people understood what it was like, Because I cannot tell you how many friends of mine have looked at me in my face and said producing is not an art form,
Oh, well, I will respectfully disagree. However, I will say that one of the reasons that it's probably hard to have a guidebook for producing is that I think that producing can mean so many different things.
Yes.
And that there are so many different kinds of producers in the world and so many different roles that producers can play that it becomes very difficult comparatively to something like directing or acting or that feels to be a bit more specific. And formulaic in a good way, not a bad way,
Yeah, and it's difficult because producing does tend to be a much more intangible form of craft. It's more in interpersonal dynamics, rather than just setting up lighting for a pretty picture.
Right.
Not to disparage gaffers.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I find it interesting, and I would say, from my standpoint, I find that I end up being a different kind of producer.
Yes.
Hello, you two.
Hello. How are you?
Good, very
You're good. Doing good as well over here.
Last time I was here, the burger was really good. The bacon and blue cheese.
I do believe their burgers are good, yes.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trev.
Talk about any questions the rest of my crowd, okay?
Sounds great.
Good.
Yeah. So, where'd you grow up?
I was born in Michigan, but I have been in the City of Angels since I was approximately 2 years old. So while I have gone back to my bearing state, I pretty much lived here most of the life that I can remember.
And so when growing up here in LA, when did you first get bit by the bug? When were you interested in entertainment?
It's a good question because I feel, first off, I oftentimes will make the differentiation between entertainment and Hollywood.
Right.
I am not always the biggest fan of Hollywood, but I really just love entertainment. I grew up, I was a child of 4, and in many ways, I had a lovely home, but it was chaotic. And with that came my ability to have television be both a friend of mine and a teacher of morals. I grew up on things, where, Ricky from Silver Spoons would have done something wrong and learned the lesson, and, Facts of Life and Family Ties and all these Happy Days and such. And I think that, in those times, things were a little bit more blatant, probably in their delivery of things. So I remember very well, learning a lot of ethical and moral things from these shows, and they became, important in my life. And I think from there, I actually gained, just a tremendous love of movies, And actually, when I decided to figure out, or was forced to figure out what I was going to do in life, I actually didn't start in the world of entertainment because I didn't want my experience in entertainment to ruin my love of entertainment.
Interesting.
You know, so I first originally kind of moved away from entertainment and was like, well, I'll just go into something like entertainment adjacent.
And was this before or after UCLA?
This was after UCLA.
Okay.
When my parents were like, what is it that you're planning on doing?
Yeah.
And I was like, good question. Got out of school. I was around my mother's house. I was living there for like, I don't know, 4 to 6 months, something. I actually, in that time, decided to pick up and create a board game, knowing nothing about board games. But I created this board game that has yet to see the shelves because it's actually a very difficult industry to get into. Even though I have had people play it and they think it's a good game, finding someone to actually take a game and make it into a game is more difficult than you would think.
So you wanted to be like an independent creator, like right out of the gate.
I think it was just sort of something I did or was doing. I won't know that I would say I was, you know, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur in that way, as much as that's what I spent those 6 months at my mother's house. But then upon needing a real job, an actual job, you know, my parents kind of said, like, well, what is it that you want to do? And the only thing I, again, sort of knew was that I think I didn't want to go into entertainment. I didn't want to spoil that for myself. I had heard things about the entertainment industry. Oh, people there are, you know, cutthroat and horrible and stab you in the back and all these kinds of things. So I ended up going into advertising, which I felt was like a nice adjacent field. You know what I mean? There's sort of some entertainment to it, but there's not, you know.
Certainly more stay there as well.
Yes. Although young man's game, I will tell you that. So, and truthfully, at the time, I knew very little about even advertising. I found it interesting, but when I went in for my first interview and they asked me what area of advertising I was interested in, I was dumbstruck by the question because I didn't really realize there were areas. My knowledge of advertising came, funny enough, from 2 television sources. One being Bewitched, where, you know, Larry Tate would come in and say, Darren, you know, how's it going with that campaign? And he'd tell you an idea about, like, you know, ostriches turning into elephants, and Larry Tate would say, that's a great idea, and, you know, and it seemed fun, you know.
I remember watching Bewitched Nick at Night too, and I remember that.
And then simultaneously around that time, outside of the Bewitched reruns, was Melrose Place. Heather Locklear's character had an advertising executive, and she too, you know, I got the big account, you know what I mean, and but there didn't seem to be a lot, you know, behind that. It just seemed, you know, like a fun job. So when I then learned that there are so many processes within and areas within advertising, the creation of it, the media buying of it, the media planning of it, the strategy of it, the brand stuff behind it, the pitching of the accounts, and, you know, the servicing and managing clients, and I was really quite surprised to the complexities of the industry. But I did go into that industry. I found my way into it, and after about a decade there, I just had made enough commercials and billboards and print ads and radio commercials and all that kind of stuff to recognize that as much as I enjoyed it and as much as I learned a tremendous amount about marketing and brands and things that I carry through to my work today, I just didn't want to be 70 years old doing that same thing, for a different client throughout that time.
So with that being said, what were some of the lessons that you came out of that environment with 10 years, as you said, learning about brands? What were some of the
I think that I learned even what a brand was. I think we can all understand that, like, Nike is a brand, but I don't think that we all understand how brands work and how they are living, breathing things.
Interesting.
And how they need to be managed. And when you think about entertainment and you think about something that's coming up right now, because I know Quiet Place Day One just came out, and you recognize, okay, that started as a movie, you know what I mean? And is now most assuredly some kind of brand or franchise, whatever you'd like to call it, you do recognize that now there is something much more than a single entity or a single commercial, endeavor that needs to be managed and needs to be thought about in that way. And I think we bring that to the table at Roddenberry Entertainment, the company I run, because we do understand that idea and the recognition that if you're lucky, that's where you're going to be. I think I learned a lot about a lot of things, actually. But brands are one of the prime areas that I find a tremendous amount of interest in, that I believe in very heavily.
Why is that?
I think because, when I was in advertising, there was the dot-com boom and bust during that time period. And I recognize in that period, just because it affected everybody, it affected the entire economy, you know what I mean, of our world in many ways. I think I was able to recognize the power of brands because it most assuredly helped a lot of people, those who survived, get through and survive, and those who didn't. A brand can be a lifeboat in those times when things are tough, and I found that to be not only intriguing, but just a tremendous potency in that I was fascinated by.
It sounds like the ability to not only recognize a brand is not just a logo, but attaching real emotional value to it that an audience can find refuge in.
Absolutely. Again, it all sort of comes together with Star Trek, obviously the largest brand that I can speak to very, very intimately. I think you learn a lot about what Star Trek has had as part of its legacy for as long as it's been around. And one of those things that Gene Roddenberry was able to imbue it with was this relationship between the show and the audience. And I think that relationship was one he took very seriously. I think it was one where, for the first time maybe, or at least one of the few times, the creator of the show was not looking at patronizing its audience in any way. It was very respectful. He had a reverence for those people that were going to be watching. He did not look at them as stupid people who are going to watch a show. He looked at them as intelligent people who could understand messages in a show and things of that nature. And with that, I think that my background coming from those brands and understanding those brands and recognizing that what we call viewer-centric entertainment, the idea that the audience has a role to play within the creation of entertainment, and that you have to recognize their existence, and that role, feels very important to us and the way we develop, produce, and I think that Star Trek to this day holds on to that as well. So I think that all of that to me, goes back to brands. If you think about that, if you think about, the idea that a brand is really one's experience with an entity in the variety of different ways you might interact with that entity. It might be because you called the office of some brand, you know what I mean? It might be because you had customer service from a brand. It might be because, there are obviously all kinds of brands in the world, but every touch point you have with the brand, whether it be watching a movie or a episode of, or going out buying something, or, being at a hotel of a certain brand or whatever, all of those are what inform your perception of that brand. And I think that understanding that allows you to understand that if you're lucky and your singular entity of entertainment turns into something more than one, and therefore there's some kind of franchisability to it, which we develop towards when we develop anything, it all comes into play there, where it makes sense and becomes important.
Okay, very. So let me ask, because obviously we're going to get into the Trek Renaissance that has occurred in the last few years.
Yes.
But how did you actually come to join Roddenberry Entertainment?
To be perfectly honest, I was lucky enough to know the Roddenberry family since I was pretty young.
The Los Angeles.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah. My business partner was Gene Roddenberry's son. And when I decided to leave advertising, he was getting a bit more into the family business. And I kind of came to him and said, I think you're sitting on a very, very cool brand, one that is perhaps well less exercised than it could be, one that perhaps is even a little bit dormant at the time. There was not a lot going on in the Trekverse, or not as much, mind you. We sort of latched our rafts together, and found a good partnership in what we wanted to achieve and how we wanted to achieve it, and what this brand meant to perhaps both of us. And since then, sort of building towards where we are today and where we will be in the future.
Yeah, and I noticed also, after you joined Roddenberry, Star Trek wasn't the first thing that you guys tackled. I watched White Room, for example, produced by a friend of the show, Ken Evey, actually.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that for us, Gene Roddenberry is most assuredly the creator of Star Trek. But I would also say that for us, Gene Roddenberry is a father of modern day science fiction. And I think with that second mantle, we started to recognize what we thought could be the power of this lovely brand that, we are inheriting to some extent, and what it could mean to a larger sandbox beyond just this franchise, but really the category of science fiction in total. And upon that, we also then recognized that science fiction itself was sort of growing, what it meant to be science fiction or sci-fi, to the point where all of a sudden, if you go to a sci-fi convention, you're probably going to start to see things at that convention that include what is technically fantasy, what are technically mysteries of science, what are technically, exploratory things within our universe. And all of a sudden, we started to recognize the ability to jump into even a larger sandbox then, within which we think that this brand has equity. And with that, we started to enlarge our scope of vision as to what kinds of projects we could take on. Hence White Room 02B3. It was the very first of its kind. It was a 360-degree narrative short film, which was in itself a tremendously interesting project to tackle, to recognize that you are shooting 360 degrees outward and wanting to tell a narrative story, which is normally told camera shot by camera shot, was a very unique thing to do, and kind of one that we had to understand how to produce anew, that was very different than any other production that we knew of, at least, because you're kind of in a video game, but you don't have control of your person. You are not in an avatar form, and with that came a lot of really interesting challenges that we had to face in making that film, and it really came in that case from the piece of machinery, which now you could probably buy a GoPro that does this for like $30 or something, but at the time, the system we used was a 9-camera system that cost, I think, like, $250,000, $300,000.
Oh my God.
To shoot this, and figure out how to tell a story in that fashion, which was, again, a wonderful
That's incredible.
endeavor to be part of.
Yeah, and I didn't realize the price tag. That's an incredibly ambitious project it's just very large and expensive.
Well, the camera, this is, mind you, I'm telling you the camera costs, that was brought in to us by our producing partners. But yeah, I think that, again, just trying to understand how you would utilize that, to me, similar to today's, figuring out how do you use AR or VR to tell stories and not just have an experience.
Right.
It's still something I think people are trying to kind of crack the code on and figure out. And I think that that's something we were able to accomplish. Very proud of it. We then did other short films. We did comic books. We did comic strips.
I did see a little bit of Roddenberry.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. We have, recognized that it is not the medium that constrains our ability to tell story. And with that, there are certain mediums that most assuredly are easier to jump into than having a television show get up and running or a film. And we wanted to make sure that we were exercising our muscles while we were building towards, this renaissance, as you say, of Star Trek and other things of that nature.
I want to ask you something, actually, because you mentioned VR and AR, and
Yeah.
talking about multiple mediums. In the mid-2000s, there was a big wave, or late 2000s, a big wave of, like, the transmedia storytelling theory. And Marvel certainly invested a lot in that with their universe, and other companies have tried to do something similar. And now, at this point, transmedia seems to have kind of petered out. I'm wondering, what is your professional opinion on transmedia?
I will just say that from my perspective, my particular perspective, which is obviously the only one I can speak from.
Of course.
When I was in the world of advertising, there was a lot of talk of multimedia. As I was getting out of advertising, there was a lot of talk of cross-platform. As now you are speaking to me about the word transmedia, I think the idea of utilizing multiple mediums for the purpose of a particular storytelling or a particular universe of stories is not really a new idea in that way. I think the way that people are executing it is different, and it continues to evolve. And I think that there's no doubt that there has been a recognition that there are people who are less interested in television than they might be in video games, or more interested in watching, a TikTok type of a form, you know what I mean, a short form or something like that, than they might be a television show, or I'm going all the way back to books, you know what I mean? There's no end to the number of books that have spawned something that has mutated or adapted into another medium.
Right.
So I think that idea is not something that is brand new, truthfully. I think that transmedia, it is a thing, and rightfully so. And I think that if people haven't accepted it yet, they will really recognize soon that video games truly are a third major media type beyond just film and television. I mean, I think you just look at the numbers that those guys put up on the scoreboard, it's crazy, And so I think the major media types are most assuredly television, film, and video games at the moment, each really deserving their own due. But recognizing that you can take, again, something wonderful like It's Only Murders in the Building or something like that right now, and say, hey, we can deliver this to people who may not be watching the show, but might be more interested in a different medium, I think is a wonderful thing. I think that there are most assuredly smart and perhaps not so smart ways to do that. But if you are going to look at something as a franchise or a brand,
Right.
It's probably going to manifest itself beyond just multiple seasons or multiple movies, alone. And I think that has to do with the power of IP these days, and just the idea that the way people consume is both larger than ever and yet more fragmented as well.
In that period, what would you say was your biggest mistake or biggest regret?
I suppose that one of the things I would say was a mistake is the recognition, or the lack of recognition, of the formidability of the industry itself. I think that you hear stories of things happening so fast, and someone finding something and it being up and running so quickly and everyone loving it, or whatever it might be. And I think more often than not, even when it looks like that, it is rarely that. Someone has been toiling away for a very long time on things, in dark corners of rooms that you don't know about. And I think that the fact of the matter is, it's very difficult to have something go, and it's becoming more difficult, you know what I mean, in many ways. One, the landscape keeps changing. It's very difficult to keep track of the mandates for different people, what they're planning on doing, what they need, what they think they want, what the audiences want, all these kinds of things. I think that that's combined with the challenges that studios are facing and even streamers and things of that nature, and everyone coming into that landscape. It's just a very daunting business, to be honest. And I think that recognizing that, as with an actor, for every yes you get, you're going to have, hundreds of no's slattered on the ground behind you, as you found your path to that singular yes, is just something that I idealistically hope isn't there or isn't true. But I think it is, sort of putting on your big boy pants time to recognize that is this industry in a nutshell. Of all the shows that ever got made into a pilot, you know what I mean? Ever got developed? Only so many made them into a pilot. Of all those that were made into a pilot, only so few made it into shows. Of all the shows that were on for X number of episodes, only a certain number of them made it to a season or multiple seasons. And in film as well, the large wins tremendously balance out the tremendous number of losses, you know what I mean, that it took to get to that win. And I think with that, comes a humility and recognition that is important for me to feel good about myself, and for me to recognize, the small W's along the way, because it's a tough business,
Absolutely.
And I've heard people today say it's more difficult than ever.
Yeah. I remember when I was at USC, I was studying under Oscar-winning writer Seth Winston. And he was talking to us about basically what you needed to do in order to succeed as a writer. And basically he said, you have to, for a period of 2 or 3 months, put everything of your heart and soul into a script and then turn it over and then completely forget it exists. Because there absolutely is, and it's not just the number of shows of pilots that get picked up. It's a running gag in the industry that only about 10% of the films or projects and their success balance out the loss of the other 90%.
Right.
And so as a result, you have for every project that got picked up and developed, there are 10 others that didn't even get close. And it is very frustrating for someone who, particularly as you said, there's more distribution options than ever. But the landscape is so fragmented that the budgets have gone dramatically down more than ever. I think even though it's a complete joke and it stars a talking horse, BoJack Horseman actually handles the complexities of the film industry exceptionally well.
And that's really wonderful when you can, to some extent, find entertainment that transcends the entertainment it is and reaches down just a little bit further to something that's going to be meaningful or thought-provoking or helpful, hopefully, to the audience that's watching it, reading it, listening to it, what have you.
I'll also say this, because there are some people who might listen to what you said about attaching an emotional value to a brand. And that's not necessarily a cynical or callous thing, because no.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I saw an interview he did. A friend of mine forwarded it to me. And he was talking about a grandmother or a grandniece, grandaunt that he had.
Don't get over here, you two.
You want a break? Get the drink. He's getting a big tip. So he was talking about it, and he was talking about how actually in the camps in Nazi Germany, there were people there who literally, after the long day of grueling labor that they were forced to work, they would just dive into these simple, sci-fi or romance or fantasy stories, and for a moment they would forget about everything terrible that was surrounding them. And so in that moment, storytelling didn't just become about escapism, it was literal escape.
Now, it's amazing to me how many different roles a piece of entertainment can play within someone's life or mind or soul or heart. From, teacher to escape from, something that challenges you, to something that, alleviates the stress of life. Something that bonds you to people around you, to something that enlightens you about yourself. It truly is such a capable animal in regard to the various things that can be done with entertainment. And I think that as things begin to open up even further, with now, as I said, video games being where they are, I know the podcast, that landscape is changing, but obviously that medium is here to stay in many ways. And the variety of different kinds of television that's out there now in regard to how you consume it, and social media and such, all of that, at the end of the day, is an entertaining or entertainment form of communication. And I think that it's just a very powerful thing. And I think that Gene Roddenberry, our founder, understood that. And I think that there are many people out there that understand that same thing or learned that lesson. And it's a wonderful thing, honestly.
Yeah.
I just recently saw Billy Crystal give Mel Brooks, I know he presented him with an award, and Mel Brooks talked about, of course, as you might guess, the power of humor. And I think, not only do you look at him and think, wow, that's something very different in some ways than what I do, but for him to, and I know by no means comparing myself, but I think that, understanding what he was able to take and utilize his talents for, and the ability to make people laugh and make them think simultaneously, by the way, and comment on things while allowing you to enjoy the hilariousness that is Mel Brooks. All of a sudden you just recognize this tremendous power that is in the hands of those who, are producing any kind of entertainment, real.
Yeah. So, speaking of Gene Roddenberry, the early 2010s roll around. Paramount is launching Paramount Plus. At what point did they approach you guys about all of these Star Trek, whatever people want to call it, reboots, rebirths, new series?
Yeah, I think, if I remember correctly, we first got a call in 2015, 2016, somewhere in there.
Okay.
There was discussion of bringing Star Trek back to television, which I think we always felt like, well, someday it's going to happen. Television is Star Trek's first home.
Right.
It allows for Star Trek to flourish in certain ways that it doesn't always have the advantage of in film. Love Star Trek films, don't get me wrong, but I think television offers something that Star Trek would definitely takes advantage of. So we always felt like that would come back sometime. So, we heard that they wanted to bring it back to television, that they wanted us to be a part of it. We were, very excited and feel privileged to this day to be a part of that, I don't want to say resurrection because that sounds so horrible.
Yeah.
Reinvigoration of this thing that, rightfully so, is still meaningful in today's world.
Yeah.
So really it wasn't, I think, dare I say, a master plan at the time to then create all of the different Star Treks that are out there right now, but to bring it back to television and focus on a singular show, Star Trek Discovery. But upon the success of Star Trek Discovery and the understanding of really not only what people are doing today, but the potential of the Star Trek universe to go beyond, the singular show. I give a lot of credit to Alex Kurtzman in regard to seeing the various different incarnations that could happen, and he talked to us very early about this idea of kind of going beyond just Discovery and working together to bring this to perhaps a variety of different entities, each of which would really have to be independent and unique and standing on its own 2 feet, but obviously all together creating, a flourishing universe in a way that we've never seen Star Trek before. And so I think that truthfully it wasn't until probably the 2nd or 3rd year of Discovery, after this, maybe the 3rd season, I feel like somewhere in there, that this idea of the multiple shows, the various different possibilities of live action versus animation and things of that nature came about.
Because Lower Decks is so radically different than any other Star Trek program I've seen. It's like incredibly.
I think that.
Speaking of animation.
Yeah, no, I think that it absolutely is. I think that Mike McMahon, had a very unique but solid vision of what he wanted to create. Sort of like if you were to create a Star Trek show, what it would look like. And for us of the legacy, I'd say, we definitely needed to understand how Star Trek could become adult animated comedy,
Right.
and still be Star Trek. Luckily for us, Mike is a true fan of the franchise, and I think that he very much felt that he was both expanding and protecting it simultaneously.
Interesting.
And with that, you end up with a very new version, a very new kind of Star Trek, but I think one that is definitely beloved by people out there who can get those inside jokes and all these kinds of things, and hopefully some kind of entry point for people who were interested in that kind of entertainment that may not have been as Star Trekian, if you will, beforehand.
So what is your, as the COO of Roddenberry Entertainment, what is your involvement? What is your day-to-day like?
I mean,
There's great restaurant, but really messy food.
yeah. At least we're not on hot ones, I guess, to some extent, my day-to-day is the same answer I have to, like, what is a producer, Whatever needs to get done is what, you got to get done.
Right.
But for me, there's sort of, first of all, within our particular company, 2 sides of my brain, which is to say that, part of my job, of course, is to make sure we are producing Star Trek and doing our part on the shows that are out there, the shows that are getting up and running, the shows that are coming to an end, the shows that are continuing, so on and so forth, in all respects on those. Simultaneously, we are developing a lot of additional stuff that may not, some of which is not in the Star Trek universe, but probably within the sort of sci-fi area of something you would find at Comic-Con. And with that, I definitely kind of switch to certain times of focusing on that side and making sure that we are hopefully continuing to expand what Roddenberry means to the world from the standpoint of the kinds of things it's putting out, and the titles under which it is putting them out. I think that I always tell people when they come to work for Roddenberry Entertainment that they are entering into what I think is a unique animal within the production world.
Interesting.
Because I feel that we are a brand as much as we are a production company.
Right.
And I think that not a lot of production companies think in that form. So sometimes part of my day is spent thinking about things that are much more oriented towards what this brand means and how we can convey that to the world. And less about, this specific project, that specific project, but all with that being really an umbrella, of course, of the projects underneath it, which are, I will dare say, the legs of the table, if you will, that need to be underneath it to hold it up. So I think that what that means in my daily life is a bit hard to probably pin down to a singular look at my world, but I think that all of that comes into play in one way or another on any given day, and focusing on everything from what we might be doing at Comic-Con, you know what I mean, to what pitches we're going to be going out with, to what writers we're talking to what casting's going on, to what we're developing and what scripts are being done and what feedback we need to give and all those kinds of things. It sort of just becomes, a question of, did I get it all done or enough done, I suppose, on any given day.
Nice. So then I'll ask this, of the last several years with so much going on, so many, not just Star Trek properties in production, but like you said, Comic-Con and writing and pitching, what has been some of the things that are the most surprising to you in the last few years?
I'd say that if I was to look at what surprises me, I would say that the reliance on IP these days surprises me. Not because I don't understand it. I really do understand where it's coming from and why it's happening. But I'm surprised from the standpoint of looking at things that are now the behemoths of, our entertainment world. The MCUs, the Star Wars, the Star Treks, all these kinds of things. And you do have to recognize that at one time those were not IP.
Yeah.
Those were ideas from someone's mind, someone's imagination.
Yeah.
And I look forward to the day where that recognition can balance out the need for IP that is there today. Because I think when people come to us and kind of, looking for the next Star Trek, if you will, my response oftentimes is, well, then you have to look for something that could be the next Star Trek, and that may not be something that is already something.
Right.
Gene Roddenberry came up with an idea. He had a concept.
Right.
And he believed in that concept. And I hope that someday soon around the corner lies the recognition that it's wonderful to take great things that are books or video games or whatever they might be and adapt them appropriately, as some things can be well adapted.
Right.
But one, not everything should be.
Yeah.
And two, there are plenty of great things out there that people need to discover and may need to be championed in order to help them achieve the potential they have. But it's well worth it, I just so believe in our ability as people to have an imagination and to utilize that imagination to explore, not only what can be entertaining, but what can be meaningful. And from that standpoint, I am surprised that that recognition is not as plentiful as I would like it to be.
I gotta be honest, that was not the answer I was expecting from that C.O.O. of Roddenberry Entertainment.
Should I can go back to one. What did the script say? What were my actual lines?
No, that is actually quite lovely to hear that one of the people who is a core part of one of the major IPs in Hollywood right now is saying, hey, we do need to champion smaller ideas.
I think it's important. I think,
Yeah.
We are going to, at some time, be stunted by our own infrastructures or mechanisms or fear. Maybe, I don't know. If we're not willing to, be brave. And by the way, I would say for those people in the big high seats, for them to encourage people to be brave, believe them, those people that they rely on to find the next Luthans. For everyone not to fear that them championing something is going to be their demise. I think it is what allows us to find next great people, next great writers and directors, next great ideas, and I think that again with no disrespect to any adaptational aspirations, as there are so many great things out there. It's just an avenue I would want to make sure isn't cut off.
Yeah. So with that being said, what is around the corner for Roddenberry Entertainment that you're excited about?
Well, so we are continuing to do a lot of different things in the world of development right now. We have a number of shows. The beginning of this year was a bit slow in regard to being able to take things out to market and pitch them.
Yeah.
We hope we are turning a corner on that. So I think that any people out there who are executives at places, outlets, and the like will hopefully be seeing our faces quite a lot in the coming months, as we have a lot of great things to bring to market. As I mentioned to you earlier, we don't sort of foresee any boundaries in regard to live action versus animation, in regard to film versus television. We are a company that does it all in that regard. So we have a lot of things to share with the world. We just recently launched a new podcast. We still love the idea of the audio medium.
Cool.
We launched a podcast called Does It Fly? It stems from a story from Gene Roddenberry in the early days of Star Trek. There was a designer, his name was Matt Jeffries. He was the designer of the original Enterprise.
Oh, yeah.
And the story goes that, at one time Gene kind of said to him, like, look, I want to make a cool spaceship, but I also want it to work. I wanted to, live by the laws of physics and science. I wanted to be something that could actually go, that people will believe. I want to fly. And we took that idea and we found a wonderful pair of hosts. Hakeem Oluseyi is a multiple doctorate scientist in lots and lots of different things, that I can't even understand. And we combined him with essentially a pop culture expert. Her name is Tamara Krinsky. You've seen her on a variety of different shows, as well as the Marvel's Red Carpet and all these kinds of things. And essentially this podcast is about looking at all of the wonderful franchises or conceits or ideas that we love and asking ourselves, does this fly? Does it fly because scientifically it's got a foundation somewhere? Does it fly in the sense that it doesn't break its own rules, as so often happens, that makes we as fans and viewers, cringe or upset? Is it just so cool that we don't care? Ever willing to say, you know what? I don't care if it doesn't do any of the things right. It's so awesome.
I love that when I get home. That sounds really fun.
So yeah, no, it's a great podcast. We really enjoy it. There's a lot of things we've already gotten into and are planning on getting into. Everything from Star Trek stuff like the transporter and, Star Wars lightsaber, of course, like can there be such a thing, to A Quiet Place's echolocation capabilities and we just love things that are grounded somehow in believability. Oftentimes in the world of science fiction that comes from science, that believability, but it's not always. And altogether, it's a really fun ride of getting to engage an audience to determine, what do you think? We're really just starting a conversation with each episode. What do you think? Does this fly for you? Does it not? Did we argue well enough or not for things? So
That sounds really cool. Yeah.
yeah. So it's a audio podcast, but it's also a video podcast that you can catch on YouTube and so on. So we're doing things like that where we're kind of churning out production that doesn't include, the studios of the world. And then we're very busy on some Star Trek stuff right now. We're going to be pitching a number of other things that we have working with studios, like Lionsgate and A&E and Warner Brothers and things of that nature. So I'm hoping, as long as the market allows, which God only knows, strikes included,
Yeah.
But as long as the market allows, I'm hoping people will see a lot from Roddenberry in the coming months and the coming years, much of which will be Star Trek, much of which will be not, but all of it that will feel like, you've got from a source that cares a lot about entertainment, that cares a lot about speaking to issues and delving in heavy, that cares a lot about entertaining people and allowing them to go places they didn't think they could go.
And that is Season 3, Episode 5 of the Producers Lounge podcast. Thank you to my guest, Trevor Roth, for joining us. You can find out more about him by checking out the show notes and subscribing to our YouTube channel at Greater Grander. Our intro and outro music today was Kumasi Groove by Kevin MacLeod. Our episode still image is provided by Roddenberry Entertainment. We'd love to hear from you, and you can check out this week's accompanying article on greaterandgrander.com entitled Writing Superhero Teams, Crafting Compelling Characters for Visual Branding. Link in the show notes. You can stay up to date by following us on YouTube and social media at the handle Greater Grander, all one word. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever fine podcasts are found. And also, if you like what we do, share this podcast with a friend who you think will enjoy it. Join us next week for more cocktails and questions, and until then, keep producing dreams.